All right, you guys, welcome to another awesome Homebuyer Masterclass here. We got prepped and ready for you guys today. As always, my name is Adam Lang, and with me is my co-host, not just for these webinars, but also for the Pursuit of Progress podcast. We'll share a little bit more info on that here shortly. But before I kind of share a little bit about what we're going to be covering tonight, I'd love to welcome Ben to the stage. Hey, Ben.
Hey, Adam. So glad to be here. We have such an exciting presentation tonight. So really excited to get into some of the details here.
Yeah, and you guys, we'll share a little bit more about who Ben is, as well as a little bit of a background on myself, since some of you guys maybe just found this webinar through a paid social ad, or depending on where you guys found us, you may or may not know us that well yet. So we'll share that here in a second. But basically, just what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about a few things, some really valuable stuff for anybody, whether you're a brand new first-time home buyer, or maybe you're somebody that's pretty seasoned and you just want to kind of freshen up and learn a little bit more about what's working in today's very dynamic, unique market. So we're going to talk today a little bit about the Denver housing market, just how it still maintains as one of the top markets in the country. It's competitive. Inventory is changing by the week, especially right now in this busy time of year in the spring, and how the rising prices are still creating some challenges, not only for home prices, but also with mortgage and interest rates. Why you guys are here? Well, hopefully you guys want some strategies just to buy smart, save money, and secure that dream home. And we're going to talk just about how to get started, discovering some of these proven tips to navigate and win in the Denver market. And then last but not least, we're just going to talk a little bit more about just some of the training that's going to be available to you guys after today's class. So Ben, let's just first off, just talk a little bit about, what some of the biggest challenges are for home buyers. Ben is one of the best home mortgage lenders here in Colorado, as well as across the country. So he sees this on a daily basis. Ben, just kind of maybe share a few of these that you're seeing on the screen, maybe some that reach to kind of speak to you directly as far as what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, that's such a great question, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present on this. One of the things that I always say, if you want to get a pulse on the market or the economy, talk to a mortgage lender. And the reason for that is because mortgage lenders a lot of times will chat with individuals, take applications on potential prospective home buyers and borrowers from all different walks of life. What I'm seeing as it relates to the Denver market, I'm seeing affordability issues, not just because of property values, but interest rates are a little bit higher currently. But then you also have things like property taxes that are an all-time high, and also the homeowners insurance world is rapidly changing right before our eyes. Another thing on there is saving for a down payment. There's a misconception that you need 20% down to buy a home. There are lots of options out there that are available for prospective home buyers. Minimum down payments, reduced down payments, down payment assistance. You do not necessarily need 20% down. Also, the ability to write competitive offers. When it comes to a real estate transaction, the mistake that I see a lot of buyers make, especially first-time home buyers, is they have the mentality that they think they have to win the negotiation and win the transaction. And it's just flat out not true. Writing a competitive offer, in my mind, is finding a way that the buyer can win and get all of the things that are important to them, but also where the seller can win too. So a successful competitive offer allows for the buyer to reach all of their goals and the seller to get what's most important to them. And that also goes in line with understanding the market. What type of market are we in? Currently, right now, we're in a very strong buyer's market, really for the first time in the last 10 or 15 years. So if you're a buyer right now, you have options. There's more inventory. You have the ability to negotiate with your real estate agent. You might be able to ask for concessions, a sales price reduction. And that will offset some of the rising home values, some of the interest rate risk with interest rates being a little bit higher, and some of the there still are some inventory challenges out there depending on what price range you're in. And then most importantly, finding the right home. It's not just about the home ownership emotions that you're going to be looking at and going through with your family. Those emotions are so important. You see the perfect home and you visualize your family, maybe your pets, your dog, but you also want to make sure that you're balancing those emotions with your budget, with some of the other considerations as far as location, and really making sure that you can afford it.
Love that.
So that's what I'm seeing here in this Denver market.
Cool. So I don't like to brag about myself. I don't think any people do. We don't have to talk too much in depth on this, but just why listen to me? I'll let Ben, maybe share his 2 cents on maybe why you guys should or should work with me in the future. But more than anything else, just on this slide, just wanted to make a point that I'm a Colorado and Denver native, as is Ben. So we're both, people that have been in Denver, in Colorado for over 40 years. Each of us have. We actually went to high school together, so we've known each other for a long time, about 25, maybe even 30 years at this point. Right now, I'm with eXp Realty. Last year, I was ranked fifth out of over 344 Denver agents. So I've got a lot of experience when it comes to the Denver market, and also have a few certifications. I'm really good when it comes to real estate negotiation, also certified in cash offers. And as you guys hopefully will continue to engage with us more in the future, Ben and I are both co-hosts of the Pursuit of Progress podcast, and I also have a Living in Denver YouTube channel. Kind of to jump forward for a second, Ben doesn't have a slide created quite yet similar to this, but Ben also has a great YouTube channel known as American Money 101, where he just shares a ton of great advice for just anybody looking to improve their financial literacy and just succeed when it comes to, making your money work for you instead of against you.
Yeah, and let me say this, it is so important to work with a real estate agent that is active and closing deals. And chances are you probably know someone. You more than likely have a friend or family member that is a real estate agent, but are they active and are they actively closing deals? When you work with Adam and Adam Sells Denver, you're working with an agent who is in the top 10% of Colorado last year in a very sales with Adam Sells Denver on Google. So I can't say enough. When you work with Adam, you're working with a true pros pro.
Thanks, buddy. And again, guys, Ben's being very generous with that, but he's got a very long list of accreditations and just success himself. Ben, how many years now have you been in the lending world? I know you've kind of, you're talking about, just how important it is to work with a realtor that has actually, been doing deals and is actively in the industry and in the market. Kind of similar with that with you. I think one of the biggest things that I love is how you've done pretty much every aspect of the lending world, whether it's underwriting, origination, just really every part of that side of the business.
That's right. When I graduated from school, my uncle at the time owned a mortgage company in Phoenix, Arizona, and this is back in 2006. I've always known that I wanted to be in the mortgage industry, and so I went to work for him. And I literally have done every job inside of mortgage, from processing to originating, underwriting, closing. I've managed a processing and a closing team. I've also worked in the secondary lock department. Most recently, I've been in origination since 2017. So I'm entering my 9th year as an originator.
Awesome. So, guys, talking a little bit about why it's so important, especially more than ever in today's market. Why do Denver buyers need a proven strategy? Well, a traditional buyer, they're reacting. They're not proactive; they're reacting. They're reactive to market trends. They're usually paying full list price. They're missing these key opportunities. When it comes to a strategic buyer, which hopefully you guys will be after today's masterclass, you're gonna be proactively researching the market, you're negotiating smartly, and you're just finding these different ways that you can have additional hidden savings within the deal. And we're going to talk through some pitfalls that you can avoid, preventing overpaying, missing important deadlines, inadequate inspection results. And when it comes to just the results, again, just talking through the Denver buyers, really using this proven strategy that Ben and I are putting together for you tonight to save significant money. Ben, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to add that, if you want to be a strategic buyer, which is so important, you want to work with a strategic buyer's agent. And a lot of buyers, they can be intimidated to ask for a sales price reduction or ask for the seller to pay for all of the closing costs. That's why you have someone representing you. But the person that's representing you needs to have the confidence and the experience to advocate on your behalf. And so it's very important to work with a strategic buyer's agent.
Love that. So we're going to talk a little bit about just understanding today's local market and start from that perspective when it comes to Denver specifically. So, there's different, obviously, changes being made on a daily basis, both locally and across the country. Lots of stuff in the news right now with tariffs and just, a lot of uncertainty right now, which is making, I think a lot of buyers concerned about actively entering into the market versus kind of staying on the sidelines. So, just talking through a little bit of this on the next few slides. What happens is every month, Denver Metro Association of Realtors, known as DMAR, they put out the prior 30 days or the prior month, I should say, market trends report. So, since we're now in the middle of April, the most recent data we have is from March. And we actually have a lot more in depth kind of highlights of this related stuff that I put out in a weekly email newsletter. So if you guys aren't subscribed to that, make sure you do. I'll share some info on that later on how to do that. But also just making sure that you're finding whatever a source that you feel is the most trustworthy, just keeping your pulse on this because it is really
Yeah.
important just to have kind of an ongoing understanding of how things can change month to month. So for March, so the past 30 days, so I keep saying past 3 days, really for the past months, the month of March, we were up significantly in home sales. We were about 25%, almost a quarter up from the prior year, over 3,500 sales. The median sales price, it's been kind of hovering right in that 650 to 660 range. This is for single family homes, also known as detached. We also have what's known as an attached, which is considered a condo, and that was at 389,000 last month. So taking those two and just having the overall median sold price right at 599,000, which is actually just very slightly, but a little bit down from the prior year. I think what's more important to look at, though, are these bottom two ones. The first one being months of inventory, showing that it's at 2.78 months, which is quite a bit down. That's just saying that this time last year, we had a little bit more than we do this year. And as far as median days in the MLS, we had 18 days, which is nice to see that going down because I think that once we get to under 2 weeks, that's just showing us that it's a lot more of an active market. Ben, I know you've got a couple kind of additional things to say to this, and I before we do that, I apologize, guys. I think I said this backwards on the 2.78 months. This is actually lower than it was last year, just meaning that we are still in a time where just because so many people are uncertain and they have maybe these low interest rates, they're just not selling quite as much right now. So that's why this is a little bit down.
Yeah, and the reason that staying on top of market trends is so important, as you're suggesting, is because it helps you identify opportunity. You'll have an idea of what's on the market, what's available, how quickly things are selling, how many other buyers you're competing against. So you want to inform yourself, and it's going to help you write more competitive offers that are going to allow for you to get your goals and your needs met.
Mm-hmm. So we can talk a little bit about just how to prepare to buy a home. And, I say it in this slide, how to prepare to buy a home this year. Anybody that maybe is on tonight and is still just kind of kicking tires, they're not 100% sure that maybe home ownership is even right for them right now. It's still important to, regardless of when that time may be in the future, that you're still just taking steps every single day, every single week, every single month, every single year, however far out that might be, just to continue to educate yourself. So when you are ready, you're in the best position possible. So before moving on to the next slide, and I'll share this again in a follow-up email after tonight, but I've got a really, really valuable, it's over 2 hours of content where I just go through in a lot more detail the entire home buyer process. So we're going to hit it on a high level tonight. But if you have certain areas that you still want additional clarity on and just, still not 100% sure on exactly what we're talking about, feel free to check out these video series that go a lot more in depth, as well as just reach out to either of us. We'll have our contact info also at the end of this, and you guys can absolutely just reach out to either of us on a one-on-one call. Just, at any time, we're available for you. Ben, I'll maybe let you kind of take this slide. So this is just the buyer's roadmap. This is a visual that I think is really helpful. You don't need to go too much in depth on this specifically, but just kind of talk to us a little bit about just what, the high level kind of, stages or chapters in this journey, what they are and what they entail.
Yeah, I always recommend just start by having a conversation. If you're interested in buying, if you want to know what your buying options are, then point number one, start by meeting with a professional. You can call them on the phone, you can text them, you can exchange dialogue over email. It doesn't need to be complicated, but you want to see what your options are. And that also goes along with point number two. You also want to see what your options are from a lending perspective. As I mentioned earlier, there are so many buyers that have these misconceptions about not just the market, but about what's required to get pre-approved for a mortgage loan. There may be affordable housing, affordable loans that you're eligible for that you may not even know. So that's why you want to have a professional look into your personal situation, pull your credit, verify your income, identify what your purchasing power is, really see what you can afford and see what loan options you might have.
Really quick,
It's a
Ben.
great way to start, and a lot of times buyers get pre-approved for more than what they were expecting. And at the end of the day, in a market like this right now in Denver, Colorado, and you have options and flexibilities, and you're working with professionals that understand what your goals are and that are going to advocate for you, that's a huge win. Moving on to step number 3, once you've had that initial conversation and you're pre-approved, then at that point, you can start looking at homes. A lot of times your real estate agent is going to set you up on a home search. And then at that point, you'll identify properties, you can look at homes. And then when you found that right property, again, not just the home that you want to live in, but the home that also aligns with some of your financial goals and considerations, that's when you're going to start writing an offer. Step 5 there is allowing your professional, your real estate professional, to help negotiate the contract. Again, that's why you want to work with someone that has that really strong buyer's experience, that's going to understand what you're looking to accomplish and is going to ask for concessions or a price reduction and get you exactly what you're looking for. Number 6, once it goes under contract, at that point, escrow will be opened. You'll deposit your earnest money, and that's when the loan approval process will start. Step number 7 is the final details just before closing. A lot of times the lender will send the final closing disclosure, usually a week before closing. It's required by law to have it at least 72 hours prior to closing. And then at closing, that's going to be the day that you sign all of the real estate and loan and title documents. And if you're a first-time home buyer, that's going to be a day that you're going to remember for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. So let's just talk now in a little bit more depth on the 5 major steps within this home buyer journey. And I love the first one because that is related specifically to you. And I apologize, guys. I just realized I forgot to update this slide. I had it earlier on, but basically the rate today, actually as of yesterday, was 6.98. So it's actually gone up slightly from the last homebuyer class we had 2 weeks ago on April 1st. Ben, you're the guy to kind of highlight a little bit more in depth on this this part or step 1 of the process.
Yeah, what's so interesting about that is with all of this tariff news, interest rates have really been on a roller coaster. So these rates right here are back from March 31st. They went all the way down into the low 6s for about 2 or 3 days, and then they went all the way back up into the high 6s, into the low 7s, and now we're right around 6.98 again. But the key is to not focus on rates. You want to focus on your goal and your vision. And really what you can control. When you know what your options are and when you've spoken with a mortgage professional, you're not going to be emotional about your financing and about your budget. You're able to stay in control. So the biggest thing about getting pre-approved is identifying what your purchasing power is, how much you want to get put down, what loan programs you're eligible for, and then what monthly payment you're comfortable making every month.
And I think it'd be fun just to maybe share a story. We won't have to say anybody's names, but we are actually working with a few different people together at the moment, and I want to bring this up because anybody that's watching that maybe is not ready to buy, but they're just to start educating themselves. A great example of why it's so important to be starting early on this is, we have, for example, one client that we're helping that is entrepreneurial based, commission based. And something as simple that you might not even think of, like just changing jobs or maybe just changing the location, moving to a different state as an example, how something where, this person has been in the same industry for going on almost 2 decades, I think it was like 18 years, yet still having a hard, challenging time getting pre-qualified, pre-approved for a certain loan amount just because of these little changes that maybe don't seem like a big deal. So Ben's very familiar with this being a challenge for a lot of different reasons, but just understanding that there are times where it's going to really benefit you by talking to somebody like Ben early on in the process, just to know that you might need to be doing a few extra things today. So 6 months from now, when you're ready to get that pre-approval, you're in a position where you can get qualified.
That's exactly right. And you want to know, essentially, when you're getting pre-approved, what we're doing is we're putting a playbook and a plan together for you as of today, all the way through closing. So we want to know exactly what the plan is, step by step. And depending on what you're looking to accomplish, if you're someone that's going to be changing markets or if you're going to be changing jobs, you don't want to be doing that during the middle of a mortgage transaction because that can be really, really complicate things. And so you want to know what to do it, what order to do it, and then also what the time considerations are. And that's why working with a professional on the real estate side, on the mortgage side is so important because once you put that plan together, it's going to remove and relieve a lot of the stress and the unknown and some of those variables that can cause problems down the road.
Mm-hmm. So there's obviously a lot of things that go into this pre-approval. We don't have to talk through all of these in depth, but just to kind of at a high level, just share a few that are typically required as part of this pre-approval process. The pre-approval checklist is what I have it called here on the left-hand side. Proof of income, just being able to show documentation of your income, W-2 forms, maybe you're self-employed, you're going to have to show, an LLC and some additional stuff just on how you're being paid. Employment verification, again, evidence of stable employment for at least 2 years, such as a letter from your employer. This is kind of what we were just talking about as far as potentially if you're changing, geographic locations. Maybe you're moving out here to Denver and you've got a great job out in whatever state you're currently at. You might have some little hoops you have to jump through related to this. Credit history, definitely a big one here. We'll talk a little bit more about some tips and some actionable steps you guys can take to make sure you're in a good position with credit history. Just any assets you have, whether it be real estate, even things like owning your car, maybe you have, other things of value, making sure you have all of that compiled and ready to share with your lender when you're doing the pre-approval. Just the opposite of the assets, any debt you have, any credit cards, maybe car loans, maybe student loans, anything like that. And then also just the down payment, just understanding, like Ben was saying earlier, there's a lot of different options out there depending on if you're a first-time home buyer, maybe a vet, lots of stuff going on when it comes to how much of a down payment you're going to be putting down. And then just completing that pre-approval application. And then also just having some property information once you're at that point of having a pre-approval in hand and you start going out and looking at homes with somebody like myself, being able to have that is so important. And actually, it's really almost a requirement at this point when you're preparing to write an offer on any home that you really, find and you love and you want to, make it your own. When you put in an offer, you're going to have a requirement by almost every seller today that with the offer, you're going to have this pre-approval letter just to show that you do have some level of intent to purchase the home and capability of making it to the closing table with what your financial situation is represented by with this pre-approval.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I always let folks know that the pre-approval process is a two-step process. The first step is filling out the online application that usually takes about 10 minutes and the credit pull. And then the second step is sending in all of these documents. So W-2s, pay stubs, reviewing the credit profile. One of the biggest kind of things that prospective home buyers can be a little reluctant at times is doing that credit check. There are a lot of banks out there, including North Point, that can actually do a soft pull. The benefit of a soft pull is that it allows the lender to look in, kind of like looking through a window at your credit profile without actually creating a hard inquiry. So the inquiry will not have any impact on your score. They can see what your scores are in real time, what debts you have with no risk and no cost. So please ask your lender if that's a concern of yours. But at the end of the day, having one credit inquiry is not going to have a significant impact on your score. You want to do as much due diligence up front. So if there are any questions or if there are any concerns, those can get addressed and mediated right at the beginning. And most importantly, you just want to know what your options are so you can structure the loan and the financing and the purchase transaction in a way that's most consistent with your goals when you start writing those offers.
Something that we haven't really talked about on our podcast or in prior webinars like this one you guys are on tonight with us for, Ben, is just the stigma or the concern that I would imagine a lot of people have, and I mean I'm at fault or guilty of this as well, of as far as just kind of letting their ego get the best of them, or maybe they're kind of embarrassed of just sharing such personal information with a stranger, with somebody like yourself that they don't know necessarily. A lot of just, personal info when it comes to just, their income, their ability to qualify, that kind of stuff. Do you have any maybe just like, I don't know what the right word would be, just kind of some like a pep talk or just a assurance to our viewers tonight, just to maybe ease that a little bit and just let them know that it's not as big of a deal as maybe they're making it out to be, because this seems to be a sticking point for a lot of people. Anytime I talk to new potential clients on my end, talk about pre-approval, sometimes they're just
Yeah.
kind of like, they're kind of dragging their feet a little bit.
Yeah, one thing that I always say, and this is how I usually open up with a customer is, I'm here and my goal is to be a resource for you. I want to help you navigate this home buying experience. I want to make sure that you're asking the right questions. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to put any pressure on you. I'm not going to tell you what the right answer is. What I am going to do is make sure that we're asking the right questions. The more information that you can give me, the more information I can give you that's going to assist you in the decision making process. You're right. We are looking at information that is extremely personal: social security numbers, IDs, pay stubs. We're verifying employment. It's very personal and it's also highly confidential. But what we do is we take that very serious. I have always said that what I do is extremely important and it really matters, because what we're doing today has the potential to impact someone over the next 30 years. There aren't too many jobs out there where, our actions today could potentially impact your kids, your family for the next 30 years. So when you look at it in that perspective, it always gives the prospective home buyer or the borrower a little bit of a different perspective, as far as that's why we want to get it right, because the implications are so big and this transaction and getting pre-approved is that important.
It's a really good way to put it. I like that. So, we talked about all the different things that are needed for that pre-approval. Now let's just talk for a second about things to avoid. And this is just as important. There's some things that can potentially take you from being pre-approved to, without knowing, all of a sudden no longer being approved. So, a couple of these that I'll share before I'll pass it back over to Ben. Definitely not changing bank accounts, showing some level of consistency. No, basically just not throwing any potential red flags out there. Don't apply for new credit, understanding that, all of this debt to income ratio and just the stuff that's happening behind the scenes is all based off of what you're presenting your lender at that point. So not changing that up after the fact. Ben, you can kind of share maybe in a second too about how once somebody, finds the home that they love, they go under contract right before the closing, within about, like Ben was saying, 72 hours, or definitely within the 7 days prior to closing, they're going to have what's known as a clear to close. And unfortunately, this happens more often than we'd like to see, but there's times where that, final stage, maybe they no longer qualify because they made some of these mistakes. Ben, I'll let you maybe share these last three and add any personal, just kind of insights that you have, just to make sure that people aren't making these
Yeah,
mistakes.
to wrap up your final point there, we do this at North Point, and all banks, all FDIC banks, mortgage brokers, they have some type of tool to verify your credit and monitor your credit throughout the process. So there will be some type of soft credit check for 48 to 72 hours before closing. At North Point, we use a debt monitoring service that alerts us if there are any new credit inquiries or any new debts or any change in credit card balances. And it's not unique to North Point. It's an industry standard, because the lender needs to know that when you apply, there has not been a material change in your credit or your finances that would impact your ability to repay the mortgage. That's why it's commonplace in the industry. Now, I'm gonna pick out one point there that we have listed. Don't co-sign for any other loans. And I'm picking that out because that is my pet peeve. I can't tell you how many times someone is co-signed and they're like, I co-signed for a family member, or I co-signed for my daughter, but don't worry, she's making the payment, not me. It's not my debt. I'm like, okay, well, we might be able to exclude the $1,000 car payment. And I'm going to get off on a tangent here really quick. You should never co-sign on a loan for anyone. Because if someone needs you to co-sign, it means one of two things. Number one, that they actually don't have sufficient income to pay that debt back. So whatever lender was trying to qualify them could not qualify them because they don't have sufficient income to actually pay the debt back. That's reason number one. Reason number two is because they have a repeated pattern of behavior of not paying their bills on time. So if someone doesn't have the ability to repay a debt, or if they have a repeated pattern of behavior of not paying their bills on time, would you want to co-sign for that person? Because that's what you're doing. Now, the reason it's so important is because from a credit perspective, it's your debt. Now, someone else might be making the payments on it, but it's still going to show up on your credit report, and you are legally obligated to repay that debt. And if it hasn't, there are circumstances where that debt can be excluded, but it's very difficult to prove that. You have to get a paper trail for the last 12 months from the other party that's been making the payments. There cannot be any late payments. All of the payments need to be paid on time from a non-joint account, and you have to be able to document all of that through bank statements. So if someone's giving you cash for the payment, that's not going to work. The debt will have to get included in your debt ratio. If someone has been paying the lender, the other lender from a Venmo app or a Cash app one month, and the next month they're doing a credit card payment, and the month after that they're using their bank account, it's not going to work. And the reason it's so important is because that debt, that monthly payment, needs to be included in your debt ratio. So it could potentially impact your purchasing power by tens, or in some cases, even hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I get it. We've all had that family member that's come to us and asked for, your help co-signing. I made that mistake. And so when you hear me preaching these things, a lot of the things I teach and I preach are from mistakes that I've made. I made the costly mistake of co-signing for a friend of mine who needed help purchasing a home and wanted me to help co-sign his mortgage. I did, and then it completely ruined our relationship and our friendship.
Yep. So we talked about, not co-signing, some of these big no's. Now, the reason for some of this also has to do just with your credit score and how important this is also. So if you guys, again, are maybe early on in this stage of, considering buying a home, but you're not at the point yet where you're ready, this is a big one where you can really start to work on improving this today, just to be in that best position possible. And it's not only just to be qualifying for the loan, it's also just to get more favorable terms, a better interest rate, that kind of stuff. So I'll let Ben share a few things on this in a second, but first and foremost, you guys, I'll be sharing with you after tonight's webinar an email with a few additional resources, one of them being a credit repair playbook that I put together where it can really just help walk you through how to take actionable steps to improve your credit score. The big one, though, is this credit utilization score and keeping that under 30%. I'll let Ben go a little bit more in depth on this, especially how it's not just for one credit card. There's I forgot, Ben, you can share with me everybody the right term. There's like a local credit utilization, but also like a global, and understanding that they both do have some weight and some importance. So tell us a little bit just about, what that credit utilization score is, and also just a really, really valuable tip for everybody just to understand how this is one of the best ways to improve your credit score quickly.
Yeah, Adam, I'm so glad you asked this because there is so much misconception when it comes to credit card debt, credit utilization. When I talk to people about credit, they always respond by saying, well, I make all my bills on time. I pay my credit card on time. It's never been late. Hey, that's great. If you want to have a good credit score, you have to make your payments on time. But when it comes to revolving accounts, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is how you manage that debt, because revolving accounts aren't like mortgages that are closed end or installment debts that are also closed end. They're revolving, meaning that there's going to be some type of credit limit. So what is credit utilization? What does that mean? So on a credit card, let's say, for example, you have a Visa credit card, the limit is $10,000. If you have a balance of $4,000, the credit utilization for that specific card is going to be 40%. The mistake that people make is they max out their credit card, but they still make their payment on time. But they don't understand that anytime you go above 30% on the credit utilization, it's going to start to adversely impact your score. So that's why if your credit cards are maxed out, your score is going to tank. Now, what the credit bureaus are going to look at, they're going to look at the local credit utilization, which is the credit utilization for that individual account or card. So the example that I just gave, that would have been a local credit utilization for a Visa credit card. 40%, $4,000 balance with a $10,000 limit. But they're also going to look at all of your credit cards combined. What is the limit on all of your credit cards? And then what is the global balance or the global utilization rate from all the credit cards? So both are key factors. That's why you always want to keep your credit utilization rate per card as low as you can. You're going to get A plus, you're going to get an A plus plus rating if you keep it under 10%, but you don't ever want to go over 30% whatsoever. And that's why I have 3 or 4 different credit cards. So I don't have to put my entire balance on one card. I have, one card that I use for business. I have one card that I use for personal. And then I also have one card that I use for really strictly entertainment, going to the movies, stuff like that. So it also helps me organize my finances as well. And, I'm able to stay on track of my spending a little bit more.
Now, share with them also a really valuable tip, but it's only, giving you guys a disclaimer here, only works if you're financially responsible. And that's just anytime you have the ability to increase your credit limit, how that then is also positively affecting this credit utilization score, because that $4,000 example at $10,000 credit limit, if you get approved for a $15,000, an increase to $15,000 on that card, now all of a sudden that 4,000 is less than 30%. So just understanding the importance too of if and only if you're able to manage your money and not just max out that new limit on the card, how important that could be too. You have anything to share
Yeah,
on that?
and that's that is such a great point. And again, asterisk, we're talking to the person that's financially literate, the person that has control over their spending, the person that knows how to budget. If you're not that person, then this suggestion is not for you. But you want to have your credit limits as high as possible. What I do on my Chase app and my Wells Fargo app, every 3 months, I go in there and I put in a request to increase my credit line. I do that several times a year. And every time it's not always a huge increase in the credit line, but it's going up constantly. And so now my credit card limit on one card, for example, is over $70,000. It started at like 7,000, but I have developed a relationship with the bank. I've always made my payment on time. I've kept that utilization rate below 10%. A lot of times what I'll do is when I make a purchase with my credit card, within that same week, I will go in and pay it off. So I'm constantly paying off my credit card balances multiple times a week. It's also multiple times a payment cycle period. So that's also a great strategy. But sometimes I'll hear, prospective home buyers or folks that I'm working with, and they'll say, I applied for a home equity line of credit. They said they'd give it to me for $200,000, but I told them that I only needed $30,000. If they're going to give you $200,000, you take it. And then you only use 10 or 20,000 for the same reason.
Love that. All right, so let's move on to step number 2. So again, guys, just kind of going back to the 5 big steps that take you from, getting started all the way to closing on your home. So number 2 is just finding the right home for you. And I've got a lot of other great, valuable resources on my website. I know Ben also is a great resource if you guys want to ever reach out to him and talk through this, but kind of just a couple tidbits, a couple little value adds I wanted to share specifically tonight with you is, finding the right home does require a lot of just organization and intention. There could be a beautiful home in every part of Denver, for example, but you first need to understand the priorities. For example, what part of town you want to be in, what's most important to you. And I think a great, just kind of a homework for you to do, if you haven't done this yet, is to just really put down a piece of paper and make a list. And on that list, with your significant other, your family, whoever else is going to be living in the home with you, write out what your must-haves are, your nice-to-haves, and your deal breakers. So a must-have would be, for example, you've got 2 young kiddos, so you need to have a minimum of a 3-bedroom house. A nice to have would be an example of maybe you really want to have a 3-car garage, but that'd be nice to have, but you'd be okay with a 2-car garage. And for anybody that's on the webinar tonight that might be from out of state, in Colorado, you're going to find out really quickly that if you guys are coming out here, most likely you're going to pick up some new hobbies, whether it be skiing, mountain biking, whatever it may be. Those activities usually have gear, and that gear usually ends up going in the garage. So if you have a 2-car garage and you have 2 cars, it's going to be pretty hard to fit once you start having some of these hobbies. So even if you do only have two cars, there's something to think about. You might want to try and find that extra space just to hold some of these fun things you guys are going to hopefully get involved in. Anyways, that's a nice to have. A deal breaker is just something that is just it's going to break the deal if you don't get it. And a good example I like to do for this one would be school districts. Maybe you have a child that is currently in a certain school district. You want to keep them in that school district. That would be a deal breaker. You don't want to look at any homes that aren't in that area. Ben, you want to share anything before I move on to kind of my next little?
Yeah, I was going to ask, and maybe this is a case by case basis, but when you're working with a buyer, from your experience, what is the kind of the first step? Is it usually location, or is it,
Location.
or is it price or something else?
I'd say majority of the time it's location. And for any out of state buyers, this is a tough one because, just to be frank with you guys, I don't want to become a tour guide. I want to give you enough resources to make the decision on your own to help kind of narrow things down for me to then take the lead and start providing you with advice and just, local tips that I've, gained over the last 40 years of living here. But I think the location is really important because pretty much in any location around town, for the most part, I'll put a little asterisk next to that too, you'll be able to find a home that does have, a price point that hopefully will work for you. But that kind of leads us into this reflection of which two of these three are the most important, because it's pretty crazy how with almost every single client that I have, and I'm guessing, Ben, you've probably experienced this yourself as well, that you really need to pick two out of these three, and those are going to really help you determine, what the best option is for you. So let's say that you do have a kind of a fixed income and you have a very specific price point that you can't go above. You have a budget, at least, of a price range you want to stay within. That's really important to you. And maybe also location. You want to be in a certain part of town. Let's just say you have a price point of $500,000 and you really want to be in like Sloan Lake, which is this really popular area just west of downtown Denver. It's an area that I used to live in. I love it over there. Those two things are really important to you. Well, at that price point and that location, you might have to take a little bit of a hit on the condition. It might not be a brand new turnkey home. You might have to find a bungalow that maybe is 100 years old that is going to have a little bit of TLC needed just to kind of get it up to the level that maybe you're going to be comfortable in. Maybe on a different example, maybe you really, really, really want a brand new home. You want that, 3,500 square foot house with a big backyard where you can put a hot tub, and you want that privacy with no neighbors right on top of you. That's really important to you, as well as, so really that's kind of two, that's location and condition. Well, if that's the case, then you got to be kind of prepared and expected to be probably paying a little bit more for that.
Yeah.
So just really two out of these three are usually achievable. All three can be a challenge unless you just really don't have an issue with price. If you have, not that many people have that. I wish I had that. Just an endless amount of money, coming out of your wallet. So
Pockets.
Yeah, there you go. Anything to add on that before I move on?
Big purse, deep pockets.
Yeah. So kind of talking again about the area first, that's what's so important, is just understanding the area. And, just to be completely honest with you guys, until, I started getting into real estate and driving around and just exploring Denver on a much more deeper, more intentional level, a lot of areas that I didn't really know that much about, just because we just never had the need to go, for example, to southeastern Denver or up north, up into Thornton and North Glen areas. So, even for somebody like myself, and I know Ben probably as well, it takes a lot of just time to really explore and understand the entire Denver metropolitan area. And a great way just to kind of start working on this process of identifying a few places that you really match what you guys are looking for is on my website. I've got over 20 of the most popular neighborhoods in Denver. It's an interactive map. You can click on any of them. It'll give you a ton of additional data when it comes to what schools are in the area, even some of my favorite restaurants, parks, trails, all that good stuff. So that's a great resource. Check it out. Just adamsillsdenver.com. Also on my YouTube channel, Living in Denver, I've got over 100 videos on there, just going in depth on specific neighborhoods. We also have neighborhood spotlights. These are just kind of like a front and back, kind of like a brochure, but I've got over 50 neighborhoods with that, sharing, the best coffee shop in that neighborhood, what farmers markets are available there, that kind of stuff. So these are just some resources that I provide, but there's plenty others out there. Just make sure whatever it is, you just start doing your homework and start identifying at least a few places that are important to you. And then the last thing before I maybe see if Ben has anything to add to this is if you do have a few neighborhoods, let's say you pick 3 that you really are interested in and you're already here in Denver, go explore those areas at different times of the day. So maybe go there during the daytime,
Great
maybe go there.
suggestion.
Yeah, maybe go there for brunch one morning on maybe on a weekend, but then maybe also go there and even like try driving from there to where you work, or maybe go
Mhm.
there kind of late at night on like a Thursday night. Maybe go at like 9 or 10 o'clock at night. You'd be amazed at how different neighborhoods can appear in the daylight versus the night. And that's not only just visually, but also just kind of the people that are around. You know, if you're maybe have safety as a concern or just other things that are really important to you. That's just a great way to kind of really get a deep feeling and understanding of these areas.
It's so interesting. I'm the same way. I've lived in the Denver metro area for most of my life, not just adult life, but I was born right here as well. And there's a couple of areas that I know really well. The area that I live, the area that I work, and then also just kind of the tech center because I'm down there quite a bit. But outside of that, I really, there are so many different neighborhoods, communities, cities that I do not know that well. And that's one thing that I love about the resources that you're providing for all of your prospective home buyers and just anyone that's interested for free on your website and your YouTube channel, where you are going into these communities and you're walking through the parks and you're sharing all this information. So it's a great place to start to get educated on what you feel may be most appropriate to kind of just help you come up with that list where where you want to live and maybe your top 5 areas that you want to narrow that down to.
Yep, love it. All right, so that's step 2. Going in now into step 3, and that's just crafting this winning offer. And Ben highlighted this at the beginning of tonight's webinar, just talking about how there's a lot of strategy that goes into this. And my goal always is to craft a winning offer that's not just a win for my clients, but it's also a win for the other side of the transaction. And just understanding that this doesn't have to be a competitive where we're butting heads with the sellers, as an example. We really can, in a lot of cases, come up with an offer that really best fits both sides of the transaction. But as far
Yeah.
as the offer, basically there's 3 things that can happen once you find that home that you really love and you want to put an offer out. You have 3 things that are going to potentially happen. First one is they're going to see the offer. They're going to think it's very well written and desirable, and they're going to accept it as written, meaning there's no changes. The second thing is they might just completely decline it. Maybe it's just way too off on the price. Maybe there's certain terms that are important to you that they just can't meet. Maybe it's the closing date, or maybe it's the date of being able to actually move into the home, stuff like that. And then a counter offer is probably what's most common. I would say this is 75% or more of every deal that I'm involved in. And that's just basically putting out an offer that's competitive and desirable, but there's a couple things that maybe need to be slightly adjusted, whether it be some of the dates and deadlines, maybe it's just the price, maybe it's something else. But basically, a counter offer is just when you, as a buyer, present an offer to the seller and the seller comes back and counters with these adjustments. So maybe you put an offer out for $500,000 on a house and they come back and say, well, you know what, we're going to counter you at 510,000. So that'd be an example. Ben, what do you have to share on this one?
Yeah, I think this is such an important point. And one thing that stands out in my mind, some of the skills that you have, is that you are willing to make that call to the listing agent before you even write their offer, where you're having that conversation. I have some buyers that are interested, but let's talk about your sellers first. What are their goals? What are they looking to accomplish? Do they need to close by a certain date? There's a lot of agents out there that just assume, I always say incorrectly, that the seller wants to close as soon as possible. What I've found is that a lot of times that's not true. There could be a specific date. Maybe the seller wants to close in 30 days because they're relocating. They might have other needs. They might be trying to hit a certain dollar amount on their proceeds back. And so the more that your agent knows up front, and this is what Adam does so well, it's going to allow you to write an offer that's more attractive to the seller.
Yeah.
And if it's
And
more
it,
attractive to the seller, there's a higher percentage that they're going to say yes. But then you can also make sure that the offer is written in a way that those things you as the buyer that are most important are being represented as well. So, for example, if the buyer, maybe they don't have money for closing costs and they need the seller to contribute $5,000 or $6,000 for closing costs, there's a way to have the buyer get the seller concession for the closing costs and also have or allow the seller to hit their number. That can be possible.
Hmm. The only other thing I'd add to that too is that it's not always price that's the most important to a seller. You got to think through again the motivation of the seller, and sometimes it could be something that's kind of sticky. Maybe it's they're going through a divorce, maybe they had a death in the
Of
family, maybe
course, that's a
they're
big one.
relocating. And these different scenarios also can really help from the buyer's perspective how they write the offer to make it the most desirable they can for that other side of the transaction. So we've got the offer out. Hopefully it gets accepted as is, but maybe it's a counter and then we counter back, or maybe we accept their counter. But once we've gone under contract, now we're what's known as the contract to close phase. And this is just really the
Yeah.
most important part when it comes to having another reason why it's important to have a good agent that is just really diligent on a couple things that I think are very, very important. One of them being the inspection. So once you're under contract and you have a certain price point that you went under contract at, let's use that $500,000 amount again. Well, this home inspection is a great opportunity from a buyer's perspective to hopefully maybe the home's going to be great as is. You're not going to have any big pushback, but this also is an opportunity for a buyer to have some negotiation to maybe get the price down just a little bit lower, or as Ben suggested, having some closing costs covered by the seller. So a home inspection is just something that is critically important, not just for older homes, but even for new builds. And this is an example of, let's just say that they do an inspection and they find that the a sewer scope is really common in Colorado, and that's just checking the sewer line that goes from the house out to the street where it connects typically to the main line. This is something that oftentimes with just the type of trees we have in Colorado, the roots start to kind of get a little funky and could potentially kind of prohibit some of the flow of the sewer line. Maybe we find this in the inspection, and this could be pretty costly, where maybe you're able to negotiate another five or seven or $10,000 as an additional money in your pocket at closing. So that's a big one. The other thing about home inspections that I mentioned about new construction, you think of a new build, brand new home. Why would I need to pay $500-600 for an inspection? Well, there's still a lot of times that new construction homes have issues that maybe the builder themselves kind of overlooked or kind of passed off and didn't think anybody would find out about. Where it's just as important for a home inspection to happen on new builds. If you're still pushing back on that, and you just think, you know what, this home looks great, I don't want to do that. Then the only other thing that I would say as an alternative is typically a home inspection, or excuse me, typically a new build will give you a 1-year warranty. So what you could also do instead is just have a home inspection scheduled at like month 10 after you've purchased the home, just before that 1-year warranty is up. And that way you can push back and hopefully get some of these things addressed then prior to the 1-year warranty expiring. Ben, I'll let you kind of handle the appraisal. That's another very important one.
Yeah, along, very, very similar to the inspection, the appraisal, you want to know that the home that you have an agreed upon sales price is actually worth what you've agreed to pay for it. And so when you order an appraisal, there is going to be a cost, but you're also getting a professional third party's opinion on the value of the home. They're going to give two different opinions of value. They're going to give the market value, which is based off of the home and the property characteristics, bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, and as it relates to recent sales within a 1 to 2 mile radius of the home. So they're going to give an opinion of value for that. And then they're also going to give an opinion of value on the estimated reconstruction cost to rebuild the home. So you want to make sure that if you have, as in our example, a $500,000 agreed upon sales price between the buyer and the seller, that the home that you've agreed to pay $500,000 for is actually worth that. Now, if it comes in less, kind of like the inspection, if there's issues, that will then give you the opportunity to either cancel the contract or go back to the seller and renegotiate. So if the home came in, if the appraisal came in at 480,000 and the sales price is 500,000, you as the buyer have the right. And Colorado is a very pro buyer state. And in the real estate contract in Colorado, there's all of these different dates and deadlines. And there are some specific to both inspection and appraisal. But if the appraisal does come in low per the contract, as long as it's written this way, which is the standard formatting, you'll have the right to renegotiate. And if the seller doesn't drop the sales price, then at that point, you have the ability to cancel the contract. Now, what if it comes in higher? Because that's not uncommon at all. I have several deals I'm working on or have worked over the past couple of months where the appraisal has actually come in higher. So if you've agreed to pay 500,000 and it comes in at 530,000, you don't need to tell the seller. You don't need to disclose that. That is your equity.
Love that. So just kind of wrapping this up, you guys, I know we're coming up on an hour here. A couple things just about negotiation. I'm not going to talk about these in depth really, but just wanted to again reiterate that it is so important just to really approach this entire process once you are under contract and you're negotiating some of these final stages like the inspection and the appraisal, just understanding that there is a lot of technique when it comes to negotiation. So, offering flexibility, we talked about that a little bit, especially things like a post-closing occupancy agreement. Maybe it's not the price that's most important to those people, meaning the seller. So just understanding that there's some flexibility that might be really to your advantage to put into the offer. That's a negotiation tool. But also I wanted to really on this slide focus on this one, know when to walk away. A lot of people become very emotional when it comes to home purchasing, and it's important to still have a solid head on your shoulders and understand that in certain cases, it might be smart just to walk away. So during that inspection, I use that sewer scope as an example. Maybe it is totally shot. Maybe you can see that it's, there's what's called a belly, meaning there's like a low point in the line, but maybe more so than that, you can see with the sewer scope, they have a camera that goes down there and allows you to kind of see what's going on. Maybe there's a bunch of tree roots and it's completely, just messed up. That could be very, very costly. And unfortunately, that's not something you just repair overnight. You're something that most likely you're going to have to incur after you purchase the home. That might be a big enough thing where you just realize, you know what, I'm better off just walking away and finding another home. So just understanding that you need to have a level head and not let emotion take over when it comes to this negotiation. So once we've gotten through all of that, we're to the final step number 5, which is the closing and the final walkthrough. Final walkthrough is super important. That usually is done the morning of the closing or maybe the night before, but some people even skip this and don't do this, but this is super duper important, especially if the home is vacant. Maybe the home has been sitting empty for the last month. The sellers have already moved on to a new place. If this home is empty, this time of year, for example, right now we're in the middle of April. Maybe somebody just got their sprinkler lines turned on and forgot to tighten up a little pipe in the basement of the home when doing so, and didn't realize it at the time. But you go over to do the final walkthrough and find out there's a foot of water in the basement. Well, thank God you did the final walkthrough, because that gives you the ability to put a pause on closing and make sure that that's addressed before it becomes your problem and not the seller's. And then closing day. Ben, you wanted to share a little bit about closing day and what makes that so special?
Yeah, closing day is the day where it all happens. You're going to come into closing, whatever your down payment is, or the cash due at closing, you're going to wire that or have that available at closing in a certified funds cashier's check. And then that's going to be the day where you sign all the documents, all of the title documents that are going to transfer ownership from the seller into your name. You're going to sign all the loan documents. You're going to sign all the real estate documents. And then after the signing, which is usually anywhere from a half hour to an hour, that is when the home becomes yours and you'll get the keys. So it's always a very, very exciting day, especially if it's your first home or if it's a new primary residence. One thing that I did want to bring up here, because the picture of the home here reminds me of new construction. And one of the mistakes that I see often is that buyers don't think they need to have a real estate agent if they're going to new construction or a new construction community. And that is one of the biggest mistakes you can make as a buyer. If you're going to go look at new construction homes, you definitely want to be working with a real estate agent, because your real estate agent is going to be handling all of this. Otherwise, you're relying on the seller, who's the builder, to do all of this due diligence for you. Are they really going to advocate on your behalf or on their behalf? And a lot of times they also control all the pieces of the pie, from the financing to the title to the warranty. And so you want to make sure that you're working with someone that is going to be truly and only advocating for you, like Adam with Adam Sells Denver.
Thanks, bud. And just to add to that, you guys, 99% of the time, it's the seller that's paying the buyer agent commission. So especially with new construction homes. So it's not going to be, for most cases, it's not going to be costing the buyer anything to be having representation by a buyer's agent. So just understanding that there is a lot of value with very little cost, if any at all.
And guess
So
what? You're not getting that money back. They're not going to give you a discount on the sales price if you're not working with an agent.
no, absolutely not. So we'll just run through this really quick, guys. There's three big mistakes. We've already covered this in a little bit, but just to kind of highlight three things that I think are really important for you guys as takeaways tonight. First and foremost, just overlooking any hidden costs. Just remembering that owning a home isn't just about the mortgage. There's other things you need to be accounting for, especially when trying to figure out what your budget is that you want to be feeling comfortable with on a monthly basis. This is going to include things like property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and potentially HOAs, which are known as homeowner association fees. The only thing I'll add to this is just with regards to property taxes. So every state is different when it comes to property taxes. In Colorado and Denver specifically, on average, I like to use a 0.5% just as a kind of a napkin math way to look at just kind of general homes in Denver, meaning that if you buy a $500,000 home, you should be expecting to pay around $2,500 a year annually in your property taxes. But anytime you find a home that's in a newer development, new construction homes are a good example of this. You're going to typically find a higher property tax amount. And this could also be in the form of what's known as a metro tax district. And this is basically, though, just additional taxes being recouped by the buyers, by the homeowners, to help pay for things like, new roads, civil engineering stuff. And it could be, as high as maybe like 1.4 or 1.5%. So it could be a full percentage point higher for your property taxes. So that same $500,000 home in a new build community, you might need to be expecting to pay $7,500 annually for your property taxes there. Neglecting home inspections, we talked about this and why this is so important, but just really understanding that, for the $400 to $500 cost that's typical for an in-depth home inspection, there's definitely going to be a lot of upside to having that done. I mentioned the sewer scope, but the other big one out here in Colorado, if you guys aren't that familiar with Denver or Colorado in general, is radon. Radon's another one that is less common in other parts of the country, but out here, pretty common. Just an odorless gas that comes out of the ground and oftentimes can get trapped in the crawl space of homes. And this is one that gets often found during home inspections, and it's an added part of an inspection that is up to the buyer to pay for. It's like usually 75 to $100. And it's amazing how often the radon levels do come a little bit high in the report. Not to be of a great concern, but what does kind of a benefit the buyer is it's high enough where then you can usually push back and almost always get a concession for this. To install a radon mitigation system is usually around $2,500. So this is an example where that $400 inspection with maybe a $75 radon test, let's just say you're in $500, it could have a return on your investment on that of maybe another $2,000. Maybe you get $2,500 as a seller concession or credit at closing. And then Ben, I'll let you maybe share a little bit again on this third one, emotional decision making.
Yeah, with the emotional decision making, this is why I think it's so important to number one, have a vision for yourself and for your home, but then also have boundaries with what you're looking to contribute and expectations as far as monthly payment, boundaries with the down payment. And when you can have those boundaries, it's going to allow you to stay more in control emotionally because it's so easy to get out of control emotionally. Where if you see a home that's a little bit out of your budget, but then all of a sudden the mortgage payment's going to be $1,000 higher than what you were planning. And at that time, all of your attention and focus is on the home, the backyard, all these incredible property characteristics. And those financial considerations are secondary, but you've already thought through the financial considerations. You really know what you can afford. And that's why you want to have this stuff listed out and broken out, not for yourself, but also, with your co-applicant or your family or your partner. And you want to share those with your real estate agent.
Mm-hmm.
That way, when you're working with your agent, they can stay in touch and on top of what's important to you.
Yep, love it. So to close this out, you guys, a couple of just bonus tips to succeed. First off, staying flexible, being open to different home types, different neighborhoods, really thinking again about that example I gave you of which two of the three are the most important to you. Is it the price? Is it the location? Or is it the condition of the home? Also, just consider new construction, especially right now if you are having some challenges with the interest rates and just maybe not being able to qualify on a traditional loan. Some of these new construction communities are offering some pretty enticing rates. There's always two sides to every story, though. So just make sure that even if you're seeing advertised rates that seem too good to be true, I think it's definitely worth reaching out to somebody like Ben and just getting his take on that, because at the end of the day, you're kind of paying for it one way or the other. So just understanding that, and then also just planning for these closing costs, understanding that there are other things than just the cost of the home that you have under contract at, understanding that there's things like title fees, inspections, buying a new build. There's some other things that can also potentially not be covered or not be included with the home. Just to
Yeah.
save time tonight, I won't go into this in too much detail, but a couple examples of this would be window coverings. You go into a beautiful model home in the new construction community and you see these awesome drapes and blinds. Then you get into your home and it's, bare and bright, and there's nothing covering the windows. Just being aware that things like that are typically not covered and you're going to be needing to pay for them yourselves after closing. Another one would be the back of the home, the rear landscaping. So typically in new construction
Yeah.
homes, you'll
The big
have
one.
landscaping in the front. A lot of times nowadays it's xeriscaped, or at least a minimal amount of landscaping that's going to require a lot of water. But in the back of the home, they're typically kind of using this as a way to justify a lower cost to the builder, where, we want you to do what you want on your backyard, whether it be laying down sod, maybe it's artificial turf. Just understanding that when you get the home, you might have, $10,000, $20,000 worth of landscaping, if not more, depending on what you're trying to get done.
You let your dog go in the backyard, and because there's no landscaping, he, gets real muddy, and then he comes back in the house and brings in all this mud, and then you get the towels and everything else, and you clean it up, and then you need to go wash the towels, and then you realize there's no washer and dryer.
And then you get really thirsty. You try to go into the kitchen and realize there's no refrigerator. That was actually the fourth one. So the refrigerator is typically not included, and that just comes down to habitability. To get the certificate of occupancy as a builder, you need to have a heating source. So you need to have a stove or an oven, but for some reason, a refrigerator is not included in that. So, this is kind of depends on the builder, but, a lot of times they'll still have a refrigerator, but it could, potentially be something that you get caught off guard with if you're not paying attention and don't see that in the fine print when you're going through this offer and this contract. All right, so Ben, let's just kind of close this out. So next steps, first and foremost, you guys just start by connecting with a lender like Ben for pre-approval. Even if you're not, going to be buying a home for another year, maybe even 2 years, still worth just chatting. Jump on a 15-minute call with him, just understand the pre-approval process, maybe share with him a little bit about your background, with what kind of employment you have, maybe if there's anything you need to be starting to think about today, so you are in the best position possible when that time comes. Also,
Right.
just connect with somebody like myself, a real estate expert that really understands the local market and has a skill set that can help you guys get the best price, but also just the best home for what really meets your needs. And understanding that there's just a lot of education that goes into all of this, and that's who wins the most, is people that are educated and just have the most just sound, solid understanding when they are in that position to make the big decisions. They have a good understanding of everything that's going on, and they're able to make the right choice. And just staying informed, being patient, don't get emotional, don't rush into any decisions. Ben, before I pass it back to you, just so you guys, again, just stay tuned. After tonight's call, you'll be receiving an email with a bunch of other free resources. I'll also include all of Ben's contact information there if you want to reach out to him, as well as his YouTube channel, American Money 101. But all this stuff is just really good, helpful stuff to start digging into. So I hope you guys do. And if you have questions when going through any of it, I'm always available and happy to just kind of share more one-on-one with you guys to help answer specific questions.
I just want to say thank you to all of our guests who joined us tonight. I certainly appreciate you taking an hour out of your day. We're here, we're available, and we are a resource to you and your family. So please do not hesitate to reach out. We appreciate you.
Yep, absolutely. And I'll go ahead and just end the recording of tonight's call before answering any questions that any of you guys might have. If you do have questions, there's a chat box on the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type those in there, or you could also just unmute and ask them directly to us. But just to keep things a little bit more private, we won't do that on the recording. So I'm going to go ahead and hit end recording. But again, you guys, thank you so much for your time tonight. As Ben said, we're just a great resource for you. And we really do mean it when we say reach out. We have a lot of just passion behind this, and guarantee that there's at least some form of value we can provide you guys with. So,
Right.
Ben,
Thank you, everyone.
see you guys.